those of you that don't know Outside In, we are a national arts charity that supports artists facing various barriers to the art world. So that can be for reasons like physical health issues, mental health issues, social circumstance, disability. We do that through a number of our programs, including our artist development program, which supports artists to create a gallery on our website and take up our opportunities through that. They also have the chance to talk about their work at our Share Art events, and also be involved in what the charity does from a very kind of involved level through our ambassadors program and our artist advisory group. And we also have our exhibitions program, which is our program of exhibitions, residencies and commission opportunities. And then finally, we have our training program, which is called Step Up. And that's our training and professional development program for artists. And that's focused around very practical kind of arts sector specific skills like curating, researching, running workshops, that kind of thing. So we were very lucky last year to receive 2 years worth of funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund to deliver a nationwide project focusing on collections of patient created artwork. And the project developed out of our history of working with collections of patient artwork. So collections like the Wellcome Collection's Adamson collection, saying collection a lot of times, and the Vaudrey collection in Chichester as well. So bringing our artists together with these collections to think about key issues like cataloguing, interpretation, and really thinking about who has the authority to be interpreting these works. You know, is it up to medical professionals? Is it art historians? Or are artists who have their own lived experience of mental health issues, can they be experts in this area? And we definitely believe that they can, and that's kind of what our work with these collections has focused on. So for this project, we are working with 3 organisations across the UK. So that's the Mental Health Museum in Wakefield, Glenside Hospital Museum in Bristol, and the Art Extraordinary Collection, which is looked after by Glasgow Museums. And at each of those venues, we are going to be running 2 of our Exploring Collections courses. So our Exploring Collections courses focus on researching and responding to collections. So participants will be equipped with those skills in researching and responding in some kind of creative way. That could be visually, it could be through audio or the written word. So we'll be running 2 of those courses. And then following those courses, we'll be delivering one of our new curating exhibition courses at each of those venues. So that will look at kind of very practical skills around putting together an exhibition, like thinking about how you might hang the exhibition, what things you need to think about, like wall labels, but it will also cover things like what story you want to tell with that exhibition. So thinking about the narrative and how you want to interpret the exhibition and how you want the audience to see that exhibition. And so that course will lead into an exhibition at each of the venues, which will bring together works made by participants of the Exploring Collections courses and works from each of those collections. And it will be curated by people who've taken part in that curating exhibitions course. And the exhibitions we're planning on organising for spring 2022, that will be next year. So just to cover a bit of the practicalities of this course. So it's going to be delivered on Zoom due to global circumstances. So we're going to be running it across 5 weeks, and there'll be 2 3-hour sessions a week for 5 weeks. And there'll be plenty of breaks in there as well, because we know that Zoom can be very exhausting. So we're going to make sure lots of breaks are scheduled in. There can be up to 7 participants on the course. So you'll be there with 6 other people and the course tutor and staff from the museum as well. And it will provide an introduction to the collection, and then you'll be encouraged to kind of choose an area of interest So that might be a particular artwork or a particular artist or a theme. And then you'll be encouraged to kind of explore that area and then respond to it in a visual way, or audio, multimedia, written, however you feel you can relate to that work. And then once the course is over, you'll be, we'll talk to you a bit more about the curating exhibitions course, and there's the opportunity to take part in that as well. So these are the dates the course is happening. And if you do want to apply, we would say we would really prefer you to be able to make all of those sessions. But obviously we know things can crop up at the last minute, so we can discuss those if there are any kind of clashes. But ideally, if you're available for all of those sessions, that would be great. And what I'm going to do at the end of my presentation is put a couple of links into the chat box that will just be places to go for more information, to download an application form, and where you can get these dates in the brief as well. So we've got a few important dates coming up. So next Monday and Tuesday, the 25th and 26th of January, we are going to be running some one-to-one artist support sessions for anyone who needs some extra help applying for the course, or anyone who does not yet have an outside-in gallery on our website and would like some help to do that. So there'll be 1 hour long sessions, and I'm going to put information on how to book those in the chat as well. So if you're interested in that, I'll put Hannah's email address and you can email her to book one of those sessions. The deadline for applications for this course is 9 AM on Friday the 29th of January. So I think that's just over 2 weeks, is it, we've got left? Just over a week and a bit. And then we'll be interviewing on Zoom on the 9th and 11th of February. So we use the word interview, but I just kind of want to stress that we don't mean a formal interview, like a job interview or something like that. It's really a chance for us to get to know you a bit better, and for you to ask any questions, meet the team, just to make it a bit more personable rather than having just kind of a paper application form. So the next steps, if you're interested after today's session, you can apply to the course if you meet outside-in's criteria. So if you consider yourself to be facing some kind of barrier to the art world, so that can be for reasons including health, disability or social circumstance. And you will also, and this is a requirement of our funding, you will also need to live in Wakefield or the surrounding areas. And we're basically, as a kind of marker for location, we're saying if under more normal circumstances you would be able to travel to the course if it were taking place at the museum, then you're very welcome and encouraged to apply. Obviously, we don't expect you to physically be able to travel to the museum, but you know, theoretically, if you could travel there to take part in the course, then you would be eligible to apply. So as I mentioned, I'm going to put now a couple of links in the chat box and a couple of email addresses of people to contact for further information. So yeah, my email address is there and my number, and I'm also going to put that in the chat box. But without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my presentation now and pass over to Jane, who's going to talk to us about the collection a bit more.
Hi everyone, hello. It's really good to meet you all virtually. I'm the curator at the Mental Health Museum in Wakefield, and I'm just going to see if I can do the technology bit first. So this could be where it all falls down. Share. And slideshow. Beginning. Yay, got it up there. Fantastic. Can everyone see that? Great, great. So just to give you a bit of background to, I started at the museum working 1 day a week in September. So it's been a strange time to start, but it's a fabulous place, and it's a a fantastic opportunity to work with a really, really special collection. So the story of the museum was, it was established in 1975 when it was part of the Stanley Royd Hospital, and the collection is quite a unique one. It sort of represents the evolution of mental health care from the early treatments to the present day, with some objects dating right back to the 1600s. And many places around the country don't have these collections anymore, and they've been sort of lost forever. But in Wakefield, we were really lucky that the hospital secretary, Mr. Ashworth, was really interested in collecting the stories of treatment and the objects. And so he was working at the Stanley Royd Hospital in Wakefield in the 70s, and he started collecting all this material, and he established the museum. So the collection comes from across the West Riding, and in the 1800s there were 4 West Riding asylums at Wakefield, Menston, Sheffield and Huddersfield. So we've got items from all those places, including here, like some of the uniforms that were worn. We've got a lot of medical equipment. We have some artwork, which I'll talk to you a bit more about in a minute. We've got lots of documentary evidence, lots of paperwork, case records, some of which are stored at the archives. So it's a really eclectic collection. It presents quite a unique view of mental health and the history of the asylums. So some of our objects, like this fantastic collection of music we found, we were looking through our stores. So part of my job has been to look at what's in store and explore some of this material a bit more thoroughly. So part of what we've got tells us a bit more about life in the asylum. So this image on the left, as I'm looking at it, is some music collections from the church in Wakefield asylum that was called St. Faith's, and there was a huge collection we found the other day of material produced for the choir there, and then some of our collection is also more recently put together. So this is the running shoe that we've got from 2002. And we're continuing to grow our collection, and what we're really trying to do is bring people into that story. So when the museum was created in the 70s, it was very much part of a medical story, but from the 20th century, we've started to bring more of the patient stories into that and bring more of an idea of co-creating those stories. So we're working with people to bring their perspectives into the story that the museum represents. So what is the museum space and its collection for? Well, as I mentioned before, around the country, a lot of these collections have disappeared. They just weren't regarded as an important part of social history, and psychiatry certainly wasn't regarded as important in terms of collecting as other medical professions have a history of. So this is quite a unique collection, and we needed to ensure that it was protected and developed for the future. But we have lots of other purposes around what we do, and as I said, from around 2011, the collection was looked at and recreated to the museum that it is today, and that has included really embedding co-creation into what we do. So we are starting conversations around our objects. We're including people's own interpretation of those objects, and we're hoping to by doing that, to challenge some of the stigma associated with mental health and work with people to recover some of those stories that have been lost. terms of patient work in our collection, we've got quite an interesting collection here, because we don't have a huge amount of fine art like some collections in the country. But as I've sort of illustrated here, there was a policy of encouraging patients in the asylum to explore their creative skills. And this is quite an interesting example, because I've looked at this many times in the museum, and I actually didn't realise initially that it was created by a patient who was just in the records is just known as Mr. M. But it's actually a really beautiful bird's eye view of Wakefield Asylum, which was commissioned by the then medical director. So we have got some of these items in our collection. What we've more of the material that we hold that might be inspirational to artists today includes things like some of the decorative work, some samplers, some lace work, and some carvings. And we have also got quite a lot of artwork that has been inspired by more recent artists working with the collection. So I'm going to hand over to Maria now, who will talk about how we think about our patient collection, and talk a little bit more about some of those themes. Is that okay, Maria? Oh.
So there we go. Rookie error. Are you controlling the slide?
Yes, you just let me know when you want me to move on.
It's like one of those government press things. Right, hi everybody. I'm Maria. I've been working at the Mental Health Museum for about 18 months now on a project that was designed to raise the profile of the museum and get more involvement from the wider community and service users. And we spent quite a bit of time working with the collection, and we had an exhibition down in Wakefield 1, which I'm guessing you're all familiar with, because I think you're all Wakefield people. So I'm just here to talk about some of the objects that Jane's just mentioned. Before I do that, can I just check? I know you're all on mute, but I think I can see you all. If you can just let me know whether any of you have ever been to the Mental Health Museum. No, no one. Anybody heard of it, even if you haven't been to it? Did you know that there was a mental health museum? Yeah. So a couple of people who've heard of it. So the museum is up in the grounds of Fieldhead Hospital, if that helps to put it in so you know where it is. So Jane's just mentioned some of the objects that we do have, and we thought normally a session like this would start with you all coming to the museum, and that's where we'd be right now, and you'd be having a good look at these things. So in lieu of that, we've had to choose some things to show to you. And we thought we'd share with you some of the thoughts and ideas that we'd had about the objects. But just to say that these are kind of our thoughts and ideas and some of our language, and it's kind of all up for discussion. So if you have different responses, by all means, do share those. So if we can just go on to the next slide, Jane. There we go. Oh. So we thought it might be interesting to start with thinking about the institution and how the effect that living in the institution might have on people's ideas about their identity and self-expression, and then how they might have responded to that, and where we can see that in our collection. And the word we've used to talk about that is control. And there's a couple of objects there that are from were in everyday use in the asylum, because there were lots of things around the place that were what these days we call branded. We're all very familiar with the idea of brands. So the asylum brand was on lots of everyday objects. So we have here at the top right, that's it's a spoon and a fork, and that's engraved with the initials, if you can see, WRA. which is the West Riding Asylum, as it was known at that time. Over 200 years, it's changed its name quite a few times, but the WRA is for the West Riding Asylum. And at the bottom left, there's a brooch from some crockery that, if you can see, is a Yorkshire rose. And again, that was the emblem that you found on lots of, on the dishes, the plates, the cups. So these were things that were around every day in the dining room. And I think this slide's quite interesting if we look at the quotes, because these are people's responses who've come into the museum and the things they've had to say about the objects. And the one on the left, the person who looked at these things, she saw them as again, the branding, that the message to the patients was very clear, that they were lunatics, which was the language used to talk about people with mental health problems when the asylum was first opened, and that everything around them was to remind them of that fact because of this branding. But then interestingly, on the right-hand side, the quote is from someone who clearly, well, a member of staff in what would have been Stanley Royd, I'm guessing, in more recent times. You may all be more familiar with the hospital when it was called Stanley Royd. And when they've looked at these things from the dining room, they've brought back sort of quite happy memories. And they've talked about it bringing back a sense of reminding them of community. So the same objects, one person has looked at them and seen institution and not in a good way, whereas someone else has looked at them and seen community. So one thing I've found working in the museum over the last 18 months is that, yeah, people can have quite different responses to the same objects. So if you want to go on to the next one, Jane. So we wanted to look at how people might have responded to their experience of being in the institution, in the asylum. And I suppose the short answer to that is we don't actually know very much, because the thoughts and feelings and experiences of the patients weren't recorded or were perhaps paid a lot of attention to. So it's actually quite hard to discern that from written records and so on. And one of the ways we can do that is through some of the creative things that have been left that from the early days of the asylum. And in the museum, we're very lucky to have a collection of samplers. We have 10 samplers by one of the patients, Mary Frances Heaton. And again, if you can just ask if any of you have heard of Mary Frances before now. Just one person, yeah, because she was in the news recently because there's been a blue plaque installed in Wakefield to commemorate Mary, and it actually made the national news just before Christmas, so you might have come across her. And she was a patient, as it says here, in the West Riding Pauper Lunatic Asylum, which was the original name for the asylum. And she came into the asylum in 1837. And she left, as I say, we've got 10 of her samplers, but there are others in other museums as well. And she used the opportunity she had for embroidery she was very unhappy about being in the asylum. She didn't agree with the decision to commit her to the asylum, and she used her needle and thread to let everybody know how she felt about that and her objections to that. The sampler on the right is unusual in that it's more decorative. The one on the left is more typical, where she's kind of used her needle and thread to write, in effect. So she's writing her story. It's quite difficult to tell from here the size of them, but the one on the right, if you can all see me, is about that big, to be very technical about it. The one on the left is a much bigger sampler, with, as you can see, lots and lots of very tiny writing that takes quite a lot of time to study. But this one is interesting because she describes her appearance in the magistrate's court after she was arrested and then appeared at the magistrate's court and was committed to the asylum. And she's describing that experience here in that sampler. And as I understand it, that's quite unusual to have a record of those proceedings from the point of view of the person being committed. And there's a newspaper account of the same thing from the time, and her account is very accurate. The newspaper and her account are very, very close. She also sewed and she also painted and wrote as well, we know from her records, but nothing of that has survived. But interestingly, her embroidery has. And as it says there, we know of other examples of where a patient's story has survived because it's been in embroidery, the textiles. So it's quite interesting that they may have survived where other things, perhaps written work, didn't. So we have 10 of those samplers that tell a very interesting story. And if we move on, Jane. And then some of the other samples of patient artwork we have come from what was seen as an important part of treatment in the early asylum, which was that work, basically. So certainly the working class people who were patients in the asylum, they were expected, if they were able, to work, and usually for men in the trade that what had been their trade before they were committed to the asylum. And the asylum was quite a huge place, as we saw from the sketch there, and it had a farm, a market garden, all sorts of workshops where lots of things that were necessary for the asylum, from the food that the patients ate to the clothes that they wore were made on the site. And these two artworks here, as far as we know, were created by a patient. On the right hand side, it's a mirror, and it's a lot bigger than it looks. There, it's quite a big heavy thing. And to the left, this is a close-up of a lectern that was used in the church, and is actually still in the chapel at Fieldhead Hospital. So that's quite a big object, and the wings, if you like, would be where the Bible or whatever the person was reading from would have been placed. And that was in St. Faith's, the church that we saw on the sketch earlier. So move on to the next one, Jane. Yeah, and these are some of the things that were more in keeping with the sorts of activities that women were expected to keep themselves busy with. So there was quite a divide. There was men's work and women's work. I think, again, it was also a class divide. So the working class women would have found themselves gainfully employed in the laundry and the kitchens. But for women, more genteel women, such as Mary Frances, who we spoke about earlier, they were engaged in needlework, embroidery, and here we've got some examples of lace work. And in the photograph, you can see one of the day rooms from the asylum, where you can see some of the examples of the lace work and so on there in the day room. Right, and the next one, Jane. As well as work, another important element of the treatment in the early asylum was what was described as recreation. So again, that was seen as quite important. So there was lots of music, drama. The book there, the music book is from church. So I think we've lots and lots of music from the church. But the asylum also had its own theatre from, I think, 1859 onwards. So it had a purpose-built theatre that was one of the finest in the area. And it was a big hall that was used for theatre performances, musical performances, dances, and also was a dining room. And it had quite a reputation for its performances. as far as we know, patients took part in those as audience. They weren't active participants. So the choir, for example, in the church, and the drama performances, as far as we know, that was more for staff who then performed, and the patients were actually more involved as audience rather than active participants in that. And the photograph of a book there is something we found quite recently. That's a fantastic thing to look at. And it's just a kind of stream of consciousness in that it's just page upon page upon page of almost the reader's portions of sentences, but the language is absolutely fantastic. It's an amazing read. We're not quite sure who is the author of this, and we're just currently researching it. We think it's someone called Joseph Popplewell, who was a patient in the asylum, but we're just trying to find out a little bit more about that. So those are just some of the items we have. And as I say, some of the thoughts and ideas that came to us, that some of the patient artwork is associated with control or protesting against that control. Some of the artwork has arisen from ideas, the well-being, the ideas of work being good for you, and the benefits of recreation, and using some of the creative opportunities that they had to express themselves. So that's